An entitled Karen demands that I move from my airplane seat just so her husband can take my seat, despite the fact that I paid extra just to get this seat. But after dealing with similar situations so often in my life, I decided to put my foot down and stand up for myself, putting this entitled Karen and her husband back in their place. Here's what happened. So I was flying between Scandinavia and Western Europe. It was just a short 3-hour flight, and I booked it several months in advance and paid just a little bit extra for an aisle seat on an emergency row. I am 6 foot tall and I love me some legroom. I then sat down with this American Karen-like woman who was already in the window seat. It's a smaller plane, so the rows have 2 seats on each side of the aisle, and the woman was looking at me pretty hard, bordering right on the edge of an impolite stare. I gave her a polite smile in greeting and carried on minding my own business. You know, just like you would normally do on an airplane. She then continues to give me this appraising look, and not even 10 seconds later, she taps her husband on the shoulder who is sitting in the row in front of her and tells him very loudly, "Oh honey, why don't you just come sit over here next to me?" She then turns to me and says, "Do you mind?" I mean, she didn't even ask me. She just basically told me to switch seats. But I didn't miss a beat. I said to her, "As a matter of fact, I do mind. I paid extra for this seat and I'm not giving it up." Well, when I said that, she stared at me completely flabbergasted, but I did not break eye contact. We stared at each other a good while, whilst her husband was already standing next to my seat with his belongings, literally breathing down my neck and encroaching on my personal space. It was like being smothered by an entitlement sandwich, but I did not flinch. In the end, she turned her red, blotchy face to the window without saying another word, and her husband was chided back into his seat by a flight attendant. It seemed like she sized me up and thought I would fold, as I must have looked like a nice young woman. And trust me, the amount of issues this cliche has caused me throughout the years is exponential. It also kind of felt like this was one of the tricks that she probably played way more often than usual. But unluckily for her, my mama gave me a sturdy spine and a taste for confrontation. And next time, if they want to sit together, then maybe they should pay for their seats. Honestly, how entitled can you possibly get if you're gonna look at someone sitting next to you and be like, "Okay, it's time for you to move because my husband's gonna sit there instead"? Like, that is crazy to me. Mostly because the original poster has it right. If they really wanted to sit together, they should have gotten those seats ahead of time. You don't just come after someone and be like, "Oh, you're gonna move so that we can sit together." That is just super rude, so it makes it even better when the original poster decides to stand up for themselves. Because if someone's gonna act this entitled, then they better expect to get some kind of confrontation. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for missing my niece's 18th birthday party simply because some of my children were being intentionally excluded? Because right now, my sister is angry at me, and at this point, I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. Okay, I want to start off by saying that my sister does not really like 2 of my children. They are 8 and 10 years old, they have autism, and they are high energy. But they are great kids. I don't just say that because they're mine. They are exceptional students, they excel in their musical and sport hobbies, and they are well liked by everyone. No one else in the family has any issue with them, and we recently attended a formal sit-down dinner and dance for my grandmother's 80th birthday, and we had no issues. When they were younger, I refused to set them up for failure and avoided fancy restaurants or other places not appropriate for high-energy kids. So we did miss my sister's 40th, as I had newly separated from my husband, had a newborn via C-section, and wasn't sure that I could cope with the kids in that setting, but was reliant on others to drive us there, so I couldn't just leave if I needed to. Plus, it was a per-head buffet, and would have been a waste to leave before eating, and I believe that she is still salty about that even 6 years later. Now, there will be other children at this party, around 20 of them, and they're all ranging from 11 years old down to newborn. My nieces invited me, and then my sister changed dates, so it's no longer on my kid-free weekend. She then contacted me saying, "You will have to get a babysitter for those 2. My other children, who are 19, 13, and 6 years old, they were invited. They are hiring a hall, cooking a barbecue dinner, having a local band play, so it is very family-friendly. Well, I've booked a holiday overseas instead for myself and the kids, and we will be there instead. I'll send the girls some cash as presents, and they are both moving to the city where I now live for university next year, so I'll help them move and fill their pantries as a housewarming gift, which I did for my oldest child as well. Well, my sister is now complaining that I'm going on holiday rather than going to her party. So am I the jerk for skipping out on this? What should I do? I personally don't think you're the jerk at all, because I think what your sister is doing is really rude. Like seriously, if she's gonna call up the original poster poster and be like, oh, the rest of your kids can be here, but those 2 other kids can't come along, then how on earth could you ever expect the original poster to honestly show up? Like, that wouldn't be fair for the 8 and 10-year-old, regardless of how high energy they might be. Not to mention that it would just be super rude, and it's making this assumption that those kids really would be like out of control and ruin the night. But I'm sure that the original poster could find some kind of activity or something for them to do just so they could try and like pass the time while they're at this party. So no, you are definitely not the jerk. I think the way that your sister is acting is completely uncalled for, and honestly, if I was in your shoes, I would definitely not go to this party either, simply because of the way that she was acting. Am I the jerk for refusing to share my inheritance with my father's new child, as he is currently demanding this money right now, claiming that he needs it before this kid is born? Here's what happened. Okay, so for starters, my father is an only child. My grandmother and grandfather were kind of disappointed with how he chose to live his life after high school, as he wasted a bunch of his time and their money pursuing courses of study that he didn't have any real interest in. They made sure he graduated debt-free and then left him to his own devices. When he married my mom, they helped pay for the wedding and gave them the down payment for their home. My mom and dad then spent the next 20 years just goofing off. When I was born, I was pretty much given to my grandparents to raise. My maternal grandparents helped as much as they could, but they are back in Argentina. So I was basically raised as my dad's little brother and not as his kid. My grandparents came to my parent-teaching meetings. They attended my sporting events. I mean, seriously, they were my parents. My biological mother passed away when I was 12 years old, and I found out weeks later since my dad didn't bother telling anybody. When I was 25 years old, my grandparents got taken within 2 months of each other. My grandfather went last, and in his will, he left my dad $50. He left an animal rescue organization $50,000, and then he left the rest to me. They had already paid for my education, and I thanked them, and I was planning on paying them back once my career got going. But now I have a huge old house and a rather nice nest egg. I'm 35, and my fiance and I are about to start our own family. Well, my dad calls me out of the blue and says that he has remarried, which is news to me, and that his new wife is expecting. And I congratulated him, not really knowing what else to do from there. He said that obviously my grandparents would want their grandchildren to share equally in their estate. He said I need to talk to the lawyers and see about setting up a trust fund for this new kid and any future kids down the line. But I said that I was not splitting my inheritance and that it was his job as a parent to provide for his children. He tried saying that his parents hadn't provided for him, but I asked him about his debt from 7 years of university. I asked about the money for his wedding and about his mortgage. I asked him to please provide me with information about how much he paid towards my education, how much he helped me when I bought my first home, what he gave me towards my own wedding. Well, he said that he didn't have the kind of money that his parents had. I asked him how much he earned at his job, and he said that he worked to live and not live to work. And that was always something that he said to my grandfather, so it really hit home with me. He has spent his entire life on easy mode. I told him that if he is a competent father and his new kids finish high school, I will happily help them get an education. But he said that he needs the money right now. So I asked him why my unborn half-sibling needed money, but it turns out my dad hasn't been paying his taxes. I offered to buy his house and rent it back to him, but he said I was being a jerk like his dad and trying to control him with money. My wife is with me, but she thinks I was harsh and that his kid deserves a leg up. So honestly, am I the jerk in this scenario? What should I do? Yeah, it really sounds like your dad was kind of a deadbeat while you were growing up. Like he did not provide for you at all, and instead basically dropped you off at your grandparents' house and said, okay, have fun. And that's really unfair to you. Also, you know what? If your grandparents wanted to leave your dad anything, they would have given him much more than just $50. And for the record, they've already given him so much money. They gave him money for his mortgage and his university studies and all this other money for his wedding, and he just blew it all down the drain. And the fact that he was lazy early in life is not your fault at all. This guy wasted away his inheritance, and he literally only has himself to blame. So in my opinion, I don't think you're the jerk for refusing to share your inheritance, because it sounds like your father is not going to use that money for his kids at all, but instead he's going to try and use that only for himself. An entitled passenger ruins my flight experience as he screams and cries about how bad the customer service is. And after dealing with this for several hours, once I finally got off the airplane, I gave this guy a piece of my mind in a way that I honestly never thought I was capable of doing. Here's what happened. So I was returning home from a trip that I cut short due to a family health emergency. The flight was pleasant, but I was in a bad place mentally. I did what I usually do in circumstances like that, and I just kept to myself saying just a few words. I plugged in my headphones and I started to listen to some some podcasts during the 2-hour flight. Over the sound of the podcast, I heard someone speaking loudly in a pretentious, nasally voice. I pulled out my earbuds and I heard a guy arguing with a flight attendant about how he had asked for something several times but didn't get it. Now, I didn't really care and I tried to ignore him, but he just kept going, asking the flight attendant for her name and telling her that the airline company must hear about it. I don't really remember what he wanted, but it was some kind of drink that they didn't have available for some kind of reason. I returned to my podcast and I raised the volume. 10 minutes later, according to the podcast timer, and he was still ranting in this annoyingly pretentious way about professionalism, as well as respect and giving customers what they want. I then switched to some rock music to drown him out, and I saw the captain coming over to talk to him. I mean, he was flailing his arms around like spaghetti. My worry about my hospitalized grandmother gave way to anger, and I started fantasizing about all the ways I would shut him up. The captain walked over with a frustrated look on his face, and the flight attendant started serving the other passengers and ignoring his attempts to stir up trouble. I think they got him some alternative drink which he never even touched. Eventually, we landed, and I put my earbuds away to get ready to leave. He was the first in line by the airplane door, and I was right behind him. The door opened, and an airport security guard was standing there to escort him through the tube. I followed behind, and by the end of the tube, a high-ranking guard was waiting for him. He stood blocking the way out, and I saw that other passengers behind me were also fed up with this guy who never shut up for more than half of the flight. He was arguing about how terrible the crew and the service was, and how he had never had service this bad before. He kept saying he needs to leave now because his family was waiting for him or some other reason. At this point, my anger was starting to boil. I thought to myself, should I shove him? Should I bang my pulling bag onto his leg? Should I punch him in the back? Would everybody start clapping? I had to head straight to the hospital, and everyone behind me had places to go. I've heard many stories about people like him online. I mean, nobody would feel bad for them, but this wasn't only about them. It was also about who I am and what kind of person I want to be. I took a couple of breaths to calm down as he was telling the guards how to do their jobs, and with the most aggressive tone I could possibly come up with, despite my stress and exhaustion, I finally spoke up. I said to him, "Get the F out of my way." Now, that F-bomb, which was definitely an F-bomb, was more than enough to stun him, since everyone else was following a code of conduct required by their jobs. And for the first time since I noticed him, he had nothing to say. Well, the guards took advantage of his silence and started to move him away, hopefully to get him to some back office where he will be delayed for a few hours. I left the airport and headed home for a quick shower and a change of clothes before going to the hospital. My thoughts kept going back to the entitled guy and how he thought he could be a pretentious and rude guy with people whose jobs require them to be polite. Politeness never works with them, and sometimes meeting someone who thinks they're scum is the wake-up call that they deserve. Honestly, good for you for the way you handled that. This guy ruined the flight experience for everybody involved, and you are 100% right. Everybody who worked on that plane probably really tried to be as professional as possible, but this guy clearly, from the sounds of it, was not going to have any of that. And I think you're 100% right as well. Being polite to people like this doesn't always work, and sometimes for entitled people like this, it sometimes is helpful to remind them that yes, you are the problem, because this guy's attitude was completely inappropriate, and I think the way you handled this was absolutely amazing. Am I the jerk for wanting to kick my brother and his family out of my house after they've been a nightmare house guest for several weeks now? Because right now they are very upset that I'm asking them to leave, and at this point I don't know what to do. Okay, so my brother by the name of Ellis, that's not his real name, recently got a job in my city that required an immediate start. We didn't have the time or money to find a place on such short notice, and his partner by the name of Taylor, also not her real name, just had a baby 7 months ago, so he didn't want her to be alone. He asked if they could stay at my place for a couple of months just so they could get situated. Now, Ellis is a responsible guy who doesn't take advantage of people, so I felt okay saying yes. So as a result, Ellis, Taylor, their 7-month-old baby, and Taylor's daughter all moved in. Before they came, I made it clear that I would not tolerate them doing any sleep training or any of this just cry it out stuff with the baby. If the baby cries, you need to make an immediate and reasonable effort to soothe him. The other rule was that Taylor was responsible for any damage her daughter did in the house. And as a note, you would think this would be obvious, but we've had previous incidents. The final rule was this: neither I nor my husband would be doing any childcare. I am a stay-at-home mom with my own daughter, as well as having a side business, and my husband works very hard, so just because we are home, it doesn't mean that we're available for childcare. Now, I thought it went without saying that they would be responsible for themselves in all other ways. They accepted all the conditions and then they moved in. And it took about 2 weeks for it all to go downhill. There were times I'd have to get up in the night to wake Taylor and Ellis up just to get the baby. Taylor's daughter has also not adjusted well to the move and is constantly playing sick to avoid going to school. Then, because she's not really sick, she spends the day causing havoc. Taylor has been bugging me to help her with the kids, despite agreeing that she wouldn't do this. She's also been expecting that she and her kids would be cooked and cleaned for. So it was 2 weeks until I was getting very annoyed, and a further 2 weeks of me being on the edge. What tipped it over was earlier this week. I was picking my daughter up early from school and going out, and Taylor asked me to take her daughter with me. She said she was drowning in things to do, and the baby was fussing and she just needed a break. But I said to her no. Taylor then swore at me and just left. When we got back a few hours later, the first thing I hear is the baby crying. I go into the nursery and Taylor is nowhere to be found. Her daughter is sitting on the couch watching TV and crying, and Taylor is nowhere to be found. Also, my kitchen is a mess, and this is also Taylor's doing. I frantically searched the whole house, only to find Taylor locked in a closet. She said she couldn't take it and she just needed a break. So I call up Ellis and I tell him to get home right now. I sat them down and I said that they had to go. I said I would chip in for a hotel, but I can't do this anymore. Ellis thinks that I'm being a jerk for going back on the deal, but he and Taylor have not held up their end. I do feel bad because I don't want to stress Ellis out with his new job, but I am going crazy. I hate being in my own home right now. So honestly, am I the jerk for putting my foot down? Because at this point, I seriously don't know what to do. No, in my opinion, I don't think you're the jerk at all. Like, I think you're getting it right. They clearly have not held up their end of the bargain, and they haven't done anything to improve that living situation in the slightest. Like, they literally went back on everything that you guys agreed upon. They're letting the baby cry at night, they're leaving the house in complete disrepair and just making a mess of everything, and they're begging you for childcare. Like, that's all the things that you guys agreed upon, and they're just completely ignoring it. So for Ellis to be like, wow, you're going back on your deal, it's like, what are you talking about? You never kept any of your deal. Like, you and your wife have gone out of your way to literally make this a miserable experience for everybody involved. Why should the original poster have to hold up anything towards you guys when she'd let you in her home in the first place under the pretense that you guys would be a good guest in her house? Like, seriously, they set up rules in the beginning and you guys are just completely disobeying them. So honestly, I think you're completely justified for kicking them out, because I know if I was in your shoes, I would definitely be doing the same thing. Am I the jerk for turning off my location tracking from my mom after I found out that she's been using that to track my every move? Because right now, I'm seriously upset, and at this point, I don't know what to do. Okay, so I'm a 28-year-old female and I have a good relationship with my mom and dad, but honestly, they struggle with boundaries. I live in a city and my parents live about 2 hours away. We have Apple Family, and as such, we have the Find My Phone application. My parents are rubbish with tech, but my dad can use the app, and I know he uses it when I drive to their house. Thursday night, I was out for drinks and I stayed at my friend's house. My usual train line stops after 12 o'clock p.m. and adds a 15-minute walk to my flat. Sometimes I call my mom when walking as she's up late and she's happy to chat. Well, Friday, I wake up hungover at my friend's house. At about 12:30 p.m., I see 2 text messages from my mom and 2 missed phone calls from my dad asking if I had a good time the night before and to let them know I was okay. Now, clearly, one of them or both of them has looked where I was the night before and then looked again to see where I was on the Friday morning, and they saw that I wasn't at my flat or the office. I replied by saying that I was fine, but also asked them to please stop tracking me. I then removed my location from the app, and she asked me to add her back, and I said no. And we honestly didn't speak after that. The week after, I drove to my parents' place, and my mom was really moody. So I confronted her, and I said I felt they invaded my privacy, and that they had crossed a boundary. They shouldn't be looking at where I am and whose flat I'm staying at. Well, she didn't agree with that, and said that she only looked because she was watching a lot of TV about crime in my city, and I didn't ring her the night before or even text her until midday Friday. She then said that she wasn't angry at me anymore, and it was better that I didn't share my location as she couldn't do anything 2 hours away anyways. We got into more of an argument, we all went to bed, and the following morning she was sulking with passive-aggressive comments and only giving me one-word answers. So I decided to drive back to the city without saying goodbye, which I know is probably childish, but I was angry. I just couldn't bring myself to apologize or make the first move when I felt I hadn't done anything wrong. It's now been about 3 weeks and we haven't spoken, and this is the longest we have gone without reconciling. reconciling. My mom is a massive grudge holder, and usually we have to grovel and apologize to reconcile with her, even if we haven't done anything wrong. She's good at being able to flip the narrative of an argument, so if she has to apologize, you do too, just so she can feel like we're both in the wrong. Now, I do not want to grovel to her first for the sake of peace, all because her feelings are hurt, which is what I usually do anyways. My brother wants to stay out of it, but agrees with me. She has been standoffish with him since I tried to justify her actions to him. She also said to him that I had really hurt her and that she was upset. Now, I didn't realize that they had been regularly looking at my location, as is not something that I would even think to do or need to set a boundary on. I am struggling to see if I am totally justified in still being angry, or if I'm the jerk for hurting her feelings, because at this point, I seriously don't know what to do. Honestly, I don't think you're in the wrong for being upset about this, because it really does seem like they were tracking you. Like they were watching your every move and they're checking where you are and where you're not at. Like that's kind of sketchy to me, especially with the fact that you're 28 years old. Like you are well into adulthood. There's no reason for them to be tracking your location all the time. So no, I don't think you're the jerk, and I think you are completely justified for being upset in the way that you were. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.